Now here at Buckle Up, we get to drive a lot of very nice new cars because we're very lucky boys. But we always get asked, what's our favourite new car? Well, this is mine. It's the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio. But before we drive it, let's talk about the exterior, and I'll start at the front because this is a pretty car. As you can see, we've got the traditional Alfa V grille with the Alfa badge prominently displayed there in the centre. We've got the off-centre number plate, which again is traditional. This is the facelift model, so we've got some new lights which incorporate the 6 eyes that traditional Alfas used to have, so you know it's an Alfa coming at you at night. And we've got massive air takes down here with rads hidden behind it as well. Carbon splitter at the front, so you don't want to be chinning that on a speed bump. And from the side we get a better view of the power bulge in this bonnet. We've also got lots of active ventage going on that is doing things. We've got these glorious 19-inch alloy wheels, which are spectacular. Alfa do the best alloy wheels out there. We've got massive fat brakes, and the discs are vented and drilled as well, because you are going to need them if you are driving this car at capacity. We've got some black door mirrors. We've got a carbon piece along the bottom of the doors, and we've got some black trim around the windows as well. This, you'll get used to this if you own one of these. This is where you put petrol in, and what it does is it turns that into noise. And here at the back we have a rather tasteful carbon fibre lip spoiler. This is basically very Giulia, and then here is where the sporty stuff is. There is an absolutely enormous diffuser and so much aero going on around this lower section of the bumper, inside which we have quad exhaust pipes, which in this car are the optional Akrapovic ones, so they go pop and bang. So without further ado, let's open up the boot. Not electric. I'm going to perch myself down because I'm going to tell you that this has exactly the same size boot as a BMW 3 Series, because Alfa benchmarked that car when they made this one. However, the opening is not as big and the lip is higher. It isn't as big as some other cars, but it's fine. There are a couple of tie-down hooks. Should we go and have a look in the back? So I'm going to start my TED Talk about the back seats with a disclaimer that this seat is not in my driving position, because if it were, I wouldn't be able to sit back here. Now, weirdly, the Giulia has a longer wheelbase than a lot of its rivals, so other publications rate it quite highly for rear leg room. I'm not convinced. I will say that it's probably more likely the foot room that's the problem rather than the actual knee room. But still, if you are my height, 6'2" or 188 centimetres tall, and you're sitting behind someone who is above average height, you are going to struggle for leg room back here. There is an enormous tunnel hump in the middle here, so if you are carrying 3 people, good luck. There's going to be no foot room, and this seat is very narrow and raised. Headroom wise, if I sit all the way up straight, my head does touch, but if I am afforded a bit of leg room, I can slouch. I've got an armrest here in the middle with 2 cup holders. Now that is good because the bottle of water that I have here does actually just about fit, but it doesn't fit in these tiny wheelie door pockets. So Alfa have kept, oh, I've dropped it. It's just on the floor now. Alfa have kept just a few things to make sure that you know it's an Alfa. And one of those is the door pockets. So it can't be perfect. There has to be some sort of flaw. And these seats fold 40, 20, 40. So you can just fold the middle one down if you want to carry longer items, which is very practical. But you can only fold it if you pull the levers in the boot. So you have to go to the boot, open the boot, pull the levers, and then come round because they don't automatically then flop forwards. You have to do it yourself. So that's very Alfa as well. In the middle, we've got 2 air vents and a USB-A because this car is getting on a bit. It has been around for a while, so things like that show. We've got nets. Annette, she's on the back of the seats, and of course we've got the obligatory Isofix mounting points. So if you want to carry a child and hit 2G around a bend, you may do that in this car. But let's go and hop up front and see what's going on up there. Up here I've got much more room, and this is where I'll be spending all of my time with this car, so that's why it's my favouritest. Anyway, let's talk about the steering wheel, because this is a upgraded one, which means it's got some nice Alcantara. He's on this in the portions that I'm going to be holding, and then leather flat bottom. We've got a nice Quadrifoglio leaf here as well. You do on this model have your start stop button here as well, which is very sporty. I've got my driver assistance systems on the left hand side of my steering wheel. I have full adaptive cruise control and self-driving stuff on the motorway because I've paid obviously for it. It's not standard. And then we've got the volume controls and things for controlling your screen for your driver's cluster in front of you here. It's not massively configurable, but it is a digital screen. We've got these fabulous paddles behind the steering wheel as well. They are pretty much the best in the business, I think, or certainly the best ones I've used. They're very lovely metal and they've got proper weight to them. We've got a screen in the middle, which is deceptive because it looks like it's going to be much bigger than it actually is, but because this car is quite old and they haven't really updated that, it does look a bit old-fashioned now, unfortunately. The graphics are not as good as something like a BMW M3, which this car does compete with. Luckily, you can connect your Apple CarPlay and Android Auto up to the screen anyway, so that's what I would be spending most of my time on, and it wouldn't bother me that the graphics aren't as good. I couldn't care less. Below that, we've got your air vents and physical climate controls. You can pick the temperature for either side and the fan speed, and you've got heated seat buttons, and you've got a heated steering wheel button. You don't have to go into the screen. Thank you. Thank you. See, that's the benefit of it being old-fashioned. Then further down, you've got another USB-A, a 12-volt socket, and then a little shelf thing that you can pop your sunglasses in if you want to. You've got 2 cup holders, and again, the door pockets are not big enough for putting stuff in, so you'll be using them most of the time. You've got your drive selector here in the center with your nice Italian flag to remind you, although everything that's slightly wrong with it reminds you that it's Italian anyway. Electric handbrake. You've got a rotary volume and skip and seek button thing here in the center. You've got a dial for going through your screen if you don't want to use the touchscreen element because it is a little bit laggy. Home button and all of that sort of stuff. This is your drive mode selector. So Alfa have DNA, dynamic, normal, all weather, changes the traction control and everything. There's also a race button on this one if you press and hold it, and you have the ability to change the damping as well, so you can have bumpy road mode, which is I think something they stole from Ferrari. Not the only thing they stole from Ferrari, but we'll talk about that later when we drive it. Practicality wise, we've got a decent cubby under the armrest with a USB-A, aux, showing its age, and a USB-C port as well. We've got another 12 volter in there. We've got wireless phone charging, although I've got mine plugged in to use the Apple CarPlay. The glove box is okay, it's not brilliant. As I've said, door pockets, And materials in here, we've got nice leather stitching, lots of exposed carbon fibre here in the centre and on the dash, which is nice, feels very sporty. I'm not sure that it feels as luxurious purely because of the age of when this was designed compared to an M3 or a C63 or an Audi equivalent. So you have to bear that in mind. I don't care. I'm more interested in the driving experience. So speaking of, let's go and do that. Okay, so driving the Giulia Quadrifoglio. Let's get the slight issues out of the way now while I'm driving around quite slowly. And they are, firstly, if you're tall like me, this B-pillar is constantly in the way when you're trying to look where you're going to change lanes or other things that you might need to do. The doors are quite short, so yeah, that's a interesting one. The tyres are Pirelli P0s, and as we said, you know, they've got absolutely zero grip when it's cold and wet, which it is at this time of year in the UK. So you have to be careful when you're driving it because it does like to light up the rears. So you have to have your wits about it. Even if it's got the traction control on, sometimes it does just lose traction, and that's fine. You know, I'm fine with a car being like that. That's what I like cars to be like. I don't like cars to be boring and safe. I will say that while we're driving down these incredibly narrow roads, that visibility is actually reasonable. The door mirrors are quite small, but you get a decent view behind you of what's going on. I can see roughly, because of the haunches, where things are. It doesn't feel too wide either, which for a performance car is quite a refreshing thing. A lot of them do feel really wide on British roads nowadays. And ride around town, so that's an interesting one. I mentioned you've got the adaptive dampers. At the minute, they're in their softer setting, and if you do want to be in dynamic or race, which you should only really be in on a track because it does turn all of the systems off, then it's in one of three settings, which is soft, mid, or race damping. But when it's in normal or all weather, it's perfectly civilised. It doesn't seem to crash into potholes. There's not too many rattles, even though this car's done nearly 10,000 miles, and those are 10,000 journalist miles, so that always tends to, it's like dog years, you times it by 5. But that's what I like, is it can do this sort of stuff as a perfectly normal car. Doesn't need to be shouty and screaming all the time. Then when you change it into dynamic, it turns everything up. I'll quickly talk you through the performance figures, because when we get on some nicer roads, I'll start driving properly. But the main figures are, we've got 510 horsepower, 600 newton meters of torque. Top speed is ridiculously high, 191 miles an hour. That completely blows the Germans out of the water. 0-60, 3.9 seconds. You have to remember this is still just a rear-wheel drive car. There is no all-wheel drive option in the UK. Miles to the gallon, not great. This has done 24 miles to the gallon this week. But that might be something to do with the fact that the engine that is producing all of those figures is essentially a Ferrari V8 with a couple of cylinders knocked off, because this is a V6, so it makes an excellent noise and it makes a lot of power, and it's got a lot of soul as well. It's turbocharged, but it's not muted, that's for sure, and I think that that's helped by that Akrapovic exhaust as well. This is not one of those new cars that has got a V8 and then sounds like when it drives past you. It's properly angry and mean. So I'm going to use my driver toggle, pop it into D, which is dynamic, and then I can move the gear selector over to manual, and then I can use the paddles. Now it's an 8-speed box and it is pretty responsive. So now, whoa, you see how much the traction comes in? Even when it's in dynamic, it's needed a lot on this car, but it is such a joy to drive something like this that actually makes proper noise. And yes, it's squirreling about and everything, but it's you know, I have to drive the car. Like, there are so many cars that you get in nowadays, it's just like you don't feel connected to it at all. But everything, the gearbox, the steering feel is, even though it's not, you know, it's not hydraulic or anything, but there is actually a sense of what the front wheels are doing. It's so beautifully balanced as well. Basically, the whole time I'm driving it, it just puts a massive smile on my face. And with that, let's go back and do a conclusion. So, the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio. Is it without fault? No. But it's those sort of things that give the car a personality. And at the end of the day, that's all I'm really interested in. And therefore, to me, it's pretty much perfect. So, as ever, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, comment down below and let me know your thoughts on why you think the BMW M3 is better than this. It isn't. But most importantly, please do subscribe to the Buckle Up YouTube channel and ding the notification bell so you never miss one of our uploads. And if you want to support what we do, then you can go down to the description, you can find our links to all our social medias, you can buy our merch, which I'm actually wearing for once today, and you can become a channel member. So if you want to do those things, please do. If not, I will see you next time. Goodbye.